So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Navyashri, and today we'll be starting a lecture on democratic forms of government, which is we'll be talking about direct democracies and the indirect democracies. So, first, let us understand by the notion or the concept of what is a democracy. So, for you to understand what is a democracy, democracy could be it's the most controversial word or the perspective which you will come across in the concept of political science ever. So, as such a controversial topic, democracy notion has been understood or conveyed differently by different political thinkers. So, but this democracy itself is intact, where the people or the citizens will be fighting if there is an absence of democracy. But all in all, if there's a democracy by default, then people would be trying to preserve it or uproot or upbring it according to the situations that arise around in day-to-day life. So examples of some of such democracies are, if Indonesia, we can Sukarno's Indonesia, we can understand it's a guided democracy, and it's Pakistan, it's a simple democracy. And another such example of communist countries, it is a socialist democracies. So first let us dissect this word democracies. So this democracy word itself is derived from Greek. So this basically it's a two words which have been clubbed together to get the meaning of democracy that we live in today or that we understand today. So it's about demos and kratia. So demos means people and kratia means power or rule. So it's a rule or power of people to make their life for a better rather than living in let's suppose what did Hobbes say, that men is at constant war. So men is a beast, men is a brutal animal. So in order to cut down such situations, they have come across such a concept of democracy where the rule will be done by the people. It's basically the power is in the hands of the people. So this is initial basic introduction of democracy, and this is the meaning or the words that been derived from the Greek words demos and kratia, which means people, and kratia means power to rule. So now let us understand the other thing. So these are the definitions given by various political scientists or political thinkers on the concept of democracy, which is again very important because you have to let's suppose a question comes on write the notions of democracy or explain what does it mean. Then you have to explain or introduce as such what is demos and kratia, Greek word, its definition, meaning, nomenclature. So here where the definition comes. So as said by the Lasky, so Harald J. Lasky, he says democracy has a context in every shape of life. And in each of the spheres, it raises its special problems which do not admit of satisfactory or universal generalization. So what did Lasky mean here? So democracy as such exists in every aspect or every corner of the life, which is a basic thing that must be there. And also it exists doesn't mean that there are no problems, but there are problems which this concept of democracy rises in our day-to-day life. And also this problem shall be addressed in a universal manner, not just concerned people only would be addressing such issues, but this rather has to be addressed universally. Then next one is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln says democracy as the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So this is what the preamble of the Constitution also addresses, that this is for the people, by the people, and of the people. So this statement itself is the government is not something that comes of otherworldly, as Plato says, or it is not something that the powerful people get hold of, but rather it is a concept for the people, which is created by the people. Why did the people create this notion of democracy? For them to have a better livelihood, or for them to protect their natural and fundamental rights in a precise and in a very, very affirmative manner. and also it's for the people. Who does this democracy or the government exist for? It's for the people itself, right? So it's by the people, for the people, and of the people. Now, Macaver also defines democracy as not a way of governing whether by the majority or otherwise, but primarily a way of determining who shall govern and broadly to what ends. So there's always this democracy or democratic governments always are limited. They do not have enormous powers. They do not have this enormous control over the subjects. So these democratic institutions, be it monarchical or be it parliamentary presidential, they all come in a limited package because they have to follow the certain set of rules that have been put up by the constitution, which is a document, which is a law of the land. So these democratic governments also shall obey this document or the law of the land and function as such. So this democracy is not a way of governing, whether by the majority. So it's always comes to the concept of like democracy means rule of majority. Democracy means the more number of people accepting by it, but rather democracy means representing everybody else, even if it's a minority or a majority, the proportional representation shall be considered. So here it's otherwise primarily a way of determining who shall govern and broadly at what ends. So it's by the people, need not necessarily be majority, but how do they govern and what purpose do they serve, under what limits. So these are the basic definitions of democracy you should understand or you should remember while writing an answer. Or if you don't remember the two, you can go for the easy one, which is Abraham Lincoln defines democracy as the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, which is very easy and catchy for you also to remember. So you can at least do that, I guess. Then Sartori also defines democracy as a political system characterized by the absence of personal power. So that is what democracy is, right? It's for the majority of the people. It's not just control of one set of individual who will hold the institutions, who will hold the citizens and their rights accountable to him, but rather it's a group, or it's a basic set of fixed institutions, and the fixed set of powers are devolved to these individuals or the elected people by the citizens of that nation. So this is characterized by the absence of personal power, and more particularly a system that hinges on principle that no one can proclaim himself as a ruler and that no one can hold power irrevocably in his own name. So this is what democracy means. So it's all in the statement itself. You can understand democracy means it's by the rule by the majority, and if the majority elects a representative, that representative is not immensible, and that representative shall have limited powers. He shall not have enormous amount of power, which would get the misuse of the power or get the control of the people under him. Then Robert Dahl also says that a responsible democracy can exist only if the following institutional guarantees are present. So the institutional guarantees, how can someone the guarantee the citizens through institutional procedures when there is a document or a legal document that will rule, or a rule book uh, which will help understand the representatives that a certain set of rules are already fixed and we shall follow such rules for the betterment and for the guaranteeing the fundamental principles of the people. And also, the Robert Dahl also says the responsible democracy can only exist if the following institution guarantees are present. So, what are those institutional guarantees that are necessary for any nation to be flourishing as a democratic state? First one is right to vote, right to be elected and hold public offices. Next one is right to of political leaders to compete for support and vote, and alternative sources of information, free and fair elections, and form of state and some regard of it as a form of society, accountability of people, and popular sovereignty. So these are all basic institutional guarantees which are necessary for, say, to talk about any institution or any nation to be called as a democratic institution. So how can this be analyzed or considered So right to vote. So when can a citizen can have free right to vote? When there is only a democratic institution or a popular leader who can be elected by the majority through any type of representation, proportional representation or first past post system, anything as such, but the citizens has to express their view or give their voting freely, and also right to be elected and hold public offices. This is also another important thing. Right to be elected and hold public offices means if any citizens are denied of holding the public offices or contesting their right to contest in elections, then it's said to have not have that nation is said not to have a flourished democratic institutions. It can be called as an aristocratic or monarchical rule. So when can citizens participate freely? When the citizens are represented in the institutions, right, in the political institution, and they get elected to the offices. And also next one is right of political leaders to compete for support and vote. So suppose only one set of ruler that comes every time and asks you to vote, you have no choice. You have no choice other than to vote for him. But rather, there are other set of people also competing equally, and they can be held accountable if they not do any thing that have been promised before electing them. So this is how the free and fair elections also shall be conducted without any rigging or capturing the booth, which will establish the confidence in the political institution or confidence in the government for the common man. And also alternative sources of information. The sources of information not just shall be from the governmental institution, but rather the media or social media or any such institutions shall also have this access to that so-called information, which can be which through which the people can have the various alternatives to gather such informations rather than holding on to one information which might manipulate. Yeah, that's how the hate speeches works. That's how the mass gatherings or the WhatsApp messages where they'll call for groups for causing any riots or doing the Rasta Rokos, etc. The information they hear is just through one source. So if you hear information through just one source, then it might be manipulated by the source that gives you this information. Now, next one is form of state and some regard it as a form of society. So, government, democratic government, is not just a government, but rather sometimes it's a society, or rather sometimes it's a civil society, or rather sometimes it's just a form of a state. So, these democratic institutions are combination of all three such things. Then accountability of the people. People shall be made accountable because and the representatives also shall be made accountable because they are elected by the people. They are representing their constituency because now the as the population is very huge, and the just like the ancient Greek cities where people were representing themselves directly is not possible in today's generation because of the population or huge number of people and and um, various cultures and various opinionated people. So they will all elect one representative, so who will represent the constituency issues and may take forward such issues in the house. So this is how the accountability could be held. And the popular sovereignty is the sovereign that must be elected, and the sovereignty of the nation shall be like in itself. It shall not be ruled by the outsider nation. And also, for example, United States is a democratic state but does not have daily accountability to the Congress. Yes, because we have read it in separation of powers, executive, legislative, and judiciary. In American system, they follow strict watertight compartments. Okay, so they can be cut down. The executive can issue an order of any legislative bills to be wide and ultra wires, and also equally the Supreme Court of United States of America, it can also cut down or declare any act or any bill ultra wires if they seem to have been not following the due process of law. Okay. And also, for a democratic government, there must be a democratic state and democratic society. So that's what we have read it in the form of a state in the first point, form of state, and some regard it as a form of society. So the government is not just the some machinery or some just people, but rather the government is uh, the democratic, both democratic state and democratic society. So the democracy here we can understand it's two types, direct democracy or indirect democracy, which can also be called as representative democracy. So now what is direct democracy and what is indirect democracy? So direct democracy is it prevailed in the city states of ancient city states. So now what is the direct democracy? Where it has been established during the ancient times or Greek city states, where people, till then, it was under the religious institutions or it was under certain set of people. But after that, the Greek city states, they have understood the democratic institutions and the need for people representing themselves. So, in direct democracies, people are said to have participated directly. They don't have any elected representative. Okay. Like just like we elect our MLAs and MPs, the ancient Greek city-state people, they don't have an elected representative because they are the elected representative of themselves. Right. So they do not it's possible. So how can we say it's possible? We have read it in primitive societies and the formation of state, if I'm not wrong, for the UG1 or UG2. So in there, we spoke about the formation of state from being a primitive society, then slowly evolving into the clan culture and then establishing a polity, then state systems, etc. So exactly these were possible because the population was limited and people could represent themselves. So if we think about now now people representing, example, if we consider the direct democracy to be followed in today's India, then who would represent who? All the people representing themselves is not possible, right? So for that purpose we select an elected representative. But here in the smaller populated states, example the Greek city states, the people represented themselves directly because the population was less. But the modern states are quite big in geographically speaking and also the population wise. So, we cannot accommodate all of them in the house. And all the issues would not seem to have been feasible. So the direct democracies was prevalent in ancient Greek city-states is not possible in modern state, which is common sense. So that because the answer is population and also geographical expanse. So these conditions makes the direct democracy not feasible in modern contemporary era. And also, but direct democracy can be found in Switzerland. And also we have read that Switzerland has a certain group of presidents. Okay, the Confederation of Federation of Presidents, 10 or so presidents, which will represent the government as such. They are all the head of the states. So the direct democracy can be found in Switzerland. This is an example in the recent times. In the contemporary times, you can give it as an ancient Greek city-state. So that the direct democracy, how does it operates? It operates through instruments of referendum initiative and recall. So the direct democracy, as people are representing themselves. So now how do these people represent themselves? So this is the first question that should come to you or click when we spoke about it is by the people. People represent themselves, but how? All of the members cannot go and sit in parliament, right? Or they cannot go and uh, make the session work. So for that purpose, certain instruments have been added. So what are these instruments? Referendum, initiative, and recall. So now let us understand deeply what is the referendum. So these are very important. These are important MCQs. So this you can refer to them. Also remember, they are important for the competitive exams. So the referendum, it means people, it refers to the people. It's like referring. Referendum is referring. But here referring who? Referring the people. Because people represent themselves in direct democracies. So it means no law passed by the legislative can be effective unless it is referred to the people in a referendum and receives their approval. Okay, how this happens? Suppose a law has been passed by various debates and discussions in the session, and now this was to be put forward to the people for the suggestions or for their opinion, whether this shall be passed to be made an act or not. So here people will pass a proposal saying, Acha, we are calling out for it. We want certain changes to be made. Then certain changes has to be made. Suppose they say this is not against. So suppose they say this is against our will and wish. So this must be scrapped. So then yeah, it will be scrapped. It will not be passed as an act. Suppose all the people or the majority of the people will say we agree by the provisions mentioned in the act. So then their proposal will be considered and that act and then that bill will be considered as an act. So this is what referendum. It refers to the people. It's in the name itself. You have to understand. Then the constitutional amendment can be valid when it is approved by the majority of the people and majority of the cantons in referendum. So be it the constitutional amendments or the normal amendments, the validity shall be approved by the majority of the people. Then only it can be considered as a cantons and referendum. Then it is remedy against the legislative commission. So now what happens here? It kind of keeps the checks and balances on the legislative activities so that legislative could not abuse or overpower itself through any such acts and bills. Same example I would give Article 368 and the Constitutional Amendment Act 44, sorry, 42nd and 42 and the laws under ninth schedule, etc., where the constitutional validity can be upheld if the majority of the people, and it's a remedy against the legislative commission because this can control uh, or take control of the legislature without overpowering itself. Then next type of democratic instrument is initiative. So what is initiative? Initiative is a Initiative is a remedy against a legislative omission. And if the legislature does not pass an act, people can propose legislation through initiative. So this initiative is a remedy and the legislator does not pass an act. People can propose. Suppose there has been an issue on emergency. Okay. So this emergency and the people want there has to be some law addresses to such things, and the legislature is not at all interested in making. Now the people can propose the legislative through initiative. So through initiating things. So everything is in the name itself, but don't just get confused if there's a massive following comes in any of the competitive exams. So first one is the referendum, next one is initiative. And in the initiative, law will come into force when approved by the people in a referendum. It may bring the legislatures in touch with the people, but it gives the people a power which they cannot utilize properly. Although there's a positive side to it, the negative side is the enormous amount of power that people hold on such institutions could not be utilized fully. Then lands germinate in some cantons of Switzerland. The institutions are open assembly prevails. Open assembly means, example, in ancient times or the medieval times, the kings used to conduct darbars, right? Open assemblies. People can attend, people can listen and analyze things, or if they can also give their opinions. So that is what the cantons in Switzerland sometimes follow such procedures. It is similar to direct democracy, yes, which prevailed in Greek city-states. Now, another most important one is recall. Now, what is recall? So recall. Also, for some time, the Election Commission of India also considered adapting this concept, recall, but they were not successful in such a huge country like India, with where election expenses are very huge. So recall means withdrawing the representatives from the assembly legislature if they do not work. Okay, if the legislature elect a representative or MLA or MP, suppose get elected and they stop working for the constituency that elected them, then people have this right to recall that person. Recall means కిందికి దించేయడం. సో వాళ్ళని పవర్ నుంచి కిందికి దించేయచ్చు. So that is what recalling. So this is a great instrument, but also it could be misused by the uh, people, or sometimes the opposition, which is not in power, or even the government, which is in power, could be using it on the other opposition members. And also, it is advocated in modern democracy to withdraw representatives from performing their duties properly. So, if they seem to have not been performing their duties, then they can be recalled back. So, నువ్వు వచ్చేసి అమ్మా, you are not doing what you were expected to do. So we are recalling you. We want another elections and elect some other person. So these are all instruments of direct democracy. Now let us understand the merits of democracy. Merits means it enables people to gain merits of direct democracy. It enables people to gain experience of administration and the government because they are directly participating in it. So, as they're participating in it and they have been a part of policy and enactment, the people will have a better understanding of how administration works, right? I hope you are all following the lecture. Then it makes the government responsible because the instruments like referendum, initiative, recall could be used by the public. So, this makes the government to act as such, or to do the work that they are in that position to do so. So it makes the government responsible and it creates a sense of responsibility, patriotism among the people. Because people get directly involved in making policies, and people will have a better understanding of the institution. This will create the oneness, and this will help them understand that, okay, this we are doing for our country, and this we are doing for our nation. So this might increase the patriotic feelings. ఏం చేసినా మన కంట్రీ కోసమే కదా, అదే అట్లా నేషనలిజం, పేట్రియాటిక్ ఫీలింగ్స్ ఇంప్రూవ్ అవుతాయి. దెన్ ఇట్ ఎన్హాన్సెస్ consciousness of the people. People just don't blindly sit down, as they have to take active participation in giving a referendum, in initiating the or forcing the legislature to initiate any such acts which would be necessary for them, and also the political consciousness of the people, because they've been actively working on ground. They are not just the bystanders, because their work could be done by some elected representatives. So here the people have to get onto the field and work for themselves, so it can create the consciousness among the people. Then it keeps voters in touch with the government. Yes, it will not need a mediator to talk to the executive, legislative, and the citizens, but rather, as citizens actively take part, as citizens are uh, the also politically educated and conscious enough, it will keep the voters in touch with the government. So these are all the merits of a direct democracy. Now let us understand the demerits. The first and foremost demerit is it is not suitable for larger states because of the population that exists in the larger states. There are too many people representing themselves in the house is not feasible. It's not practically true. So that is why we get this concept of an elected representative representing the certain constituency that he or she is elected from in the house. So all the people are not suitable to give their opinion under the system. They simply say yes or no. Also, it will cut short down because everybody sit down to argue. See, initiative, referendum, and recall law, kuda, you cannot sit down and claim this is the mistake done by them. So you will directly recall them, or you will directly give your opinion of yes or no in referendum also. So that's how it happens. And it cannot take secret decisions on war and emergencies because as people are involved in internal the government policies, then there's an open book system. So there's an open society system or open government functioning. So the secrecy could not be maintained as the people have to be involved in each and every policy or each and every function of the legislature. So that is why it cannot be feasible during the emergency or warlike situations because the information is out right in the public. It could be used by the enemy nation also, right? So, and also it requires high sense of responsibility, which people lack. So, usually people are not politically um, educated, so they do not have this responsibility to follow certain procedures in establishing a law which is useful for them. So, this requires a high sense of responsibility where the people lack. Then another concept is indirect democracy. So what is indirect democracy? This indirect democracy is prevailed everywhere except for some of the aristocratic or monarchical nations and Switzerland. So why? People elect their representatives who sit in the parliament and make laws. So this is called indirect democracy. So now what is indirect democracy? People elect representative. You elect MLAs and MPs on behalf of the constitution, and these people will in turn sit in the parliament and or the state assemblies or the state legislative councils and make act, and they will represent you, right? So this will called in this is called as indirect democracy. Then features of direct democracy. Features of indirect democracy. Now, what are features of indirect democracy? It is a representative form of government in which people representative takes action. That is why, that is what happens, right? As people cannot directly participate, it is rather these represented electives represented members will take decisions on behalf of the people or on behalf of the constituency that they represent. So people have an indirect or passive say in making such bill, not direct as such explained in direct democracy. Now, sovereignty is vested in the people because people are the highest authority. They will elect who can be or who shall be the government. And also, the government works on the behalf of the people. Then, the people do not get chance to participate in affairs of the state because there's a huge number and it's not possible. So, just like in democratic institution or ancient Greek city states, the direct participation of people in the affairs of the state is ruled out because the elected representatives are elected for the main purpose of representing the whole of constituency in the parliament. So now what if all the people of the constituency will come into or through what can we say the instruments of in direct democracy like referendum, recall, initiative. So here the as the population is huge and it's heterogeneous, we might not reach to a climax. So we might not reach to a single set of opinions. So that is why the people our representatives are working on behalf of the people, and people do not get chance to participate in the affairs of the state. Now, next one, the merits of indirect democracy. Now, what are the merits of indirect democracy? It is suitable for big countries only, because smaller countries, anyway, the population is small and the people can represent themselves directly through the instruments, whereas in it's only confined to larger democracies. So that is why we have indirect democracy. Here, the political demagogues play an important role. They can mobilize the voters in their favor. Yes, that is what the political parties do during the election campaigning, right? They motivate people and they represent themselves how better they could be if once elected by the people, and how better they can represent these people in the parliament. And also they can mobilize voters in their favor as they are in public and as they represent such issues. So they can also be called for uh, as they run the government on behalf of the people. Secrecy can be maintained where it is required, as it is not open system, and not every general public will come into and participate in the sessions of the house. The according to rules and book procedure of the house, the I'm talking about India. So here, as per the rules and procedure of the house for the proper functioning, the some of the sessions could be not be telecasted if the government thinks this might be beneficial to the enemy state. So here now secrecy can be maintained as it is uh, indirect democracy. Now next one is merits of demerits of indirect democracy. So what happens in demerits? So what are the merits of the direct democracy? Could possibly be more or less the demerits of indirect democracy. Now, the voters are ignorant. Most of the voters are ignorant, and especially with the third world countries, the voters are not properly educated. So, their literacy rate is not as improved or as developed as the developed economies or developed democracies. So, the voters do not have the sense of political scope. So, however, it is not possible to waste the power in their hands, as they do not lack any information. This might be used to abuse of power also. Now, next one, direct contact between voters and representatives cannot be established under the system, because there will be some elected representatives who will represent all the voters under this system. It gives rise to corruption. Political parties vitiate the atmosphere of the countries, because the political parties are the people whose members uh, are elected by the people as an elected representatives. So this might lead to corruption, because you can see during the election manifestos or during the election campaigns where people will be given money to vote or get elected them. So this will lead to institutional corruption, which might lead for the collapse of the nation itself. Or people will lose trust in such political institutions. And also, it is very expensive. For example, holding of an elections in a nation like India entails very expensive. So recent only we had the election to be conducted, and then you can make sense. Let's suppose in your ward itself or in your constituency itself, how much money has been spent by the elected by the party candidate to be getting elected to the parliament, right? So this will create a lot of uh, expenses. It will create a burden on the EC or the government, and it will create a lot of expenses for holding of an election of a country. India entails heavy expenditure. So Indian expenditure or Indian political parties will spend a lot of money in the elections, and this has been uh, complained by the EC for most of the time. And also they come up with the Representation of People's Act 1951 or 50, and bringing up the limit the limit on the spending of a candidate and limit on spending of the party, the limit on spending of money by the star ambassadors to certain extent. Now let us understand the characteristics of democracy. So what are the characteristics of democracy? Popular sovereignty. So democracy is based on sovereignty of the people. It's the law of land, and the people are the, it's an end in itself. People are the authority. There is no external authority outside of the state which will govern or which will rule the state. And this is to say people exercise supreme power in a democracy, right? So people will have enormous amount of power by controlling, as people are the one who elect the sovereign, popular sovereign person, and also they have the right to elect the government, and the government remains responsible to them. How, what happens during elections? This is what happens, right? We all will elect members, and these members will certainly form uh, a group, the majority group, which will eventually form the what can we say, the government. So the people have right to overthrow it and institute a new government also. Then political, social, and economic equality are also the basic criteria for help understanding the democracy or the characteristics of the democracy. The next one is majority rule. Democracy is the rule of majority, and it is the majority that governs in a democracy. And no party can govern unless it has acquired the majority of seats in a legislature. So that is why the majority party is for, right? So highest number of seats, then you can form the government. And the next immediate party, which is opposition, will have little lesser number of seats, but also this opposition will have a tab, will keep a tab on the government. And also opinion of the minority should be given due consideration. So democracy doesn't mean that just the views they are favorable to the what direct democracies, or they are favorable to the public, but rather here in indirect democracies, the minority situations are also could be considered. Now, next one is rights. Democracy provides various kinds of rights of individuals. Yes, right to live, and your fundamental rights will be protected, your natural rights will be protected. So, all such things, the various kinds of rights of the individuals. Then, for example, right of freedom of speech and expression, right to form unions or associations, religious freedom, right to free movement and educational institutions, cultural, and some of the rights that people enjoy in a democracy. So these are all basic necessary rights, or the fundamental rights which are needed in order to have this, or in order to be called these institutions as a democratic institutions by the people. So it upholds individual dignity because individuals are, or suppose the state is accountable to the people, so that people can have their fundamental rights and enjoy their fundamental rights. And also, it upholds individual dignity and the government by adjustment and compromise. Then, democracy is a welfare oriented concept. Then, rule of law, independence of judiciary, democracy is a theory of society as well as leadership. This point we have read earlier, and the leadership, because who can represent you in the parliament? The person who has such qualities, right, who can call himself as a leader of the vast majority of the people in the constituency. So unless you have such skills, unless you have that zeal to be leading the group, you cannot consider yourself as a leader. Then rule of law, it's like the rule of law is the highest authority, and no a law of man or individual shall prevail. And independence of judiciary, this also we have read it in judiciary and judicial review chapter, where the independence of judiciary is a key concept or the basic structure of our Indian constitution, which will help understand or which will enable them to have this independent freedomship. Now, next, the other one is democracy is welfare oriented concept, because it will also look into both majority and minority people and their interest into consideration. So that is why it can be called as welfare oriented concept. Now, next, understand the merits and demerits. So, first one, we'll talk about merits. It's a rational form of government, because everybody will sit down, think, then vote for their certain member to be representing themselves. They cannot just go out and vote randomly, right? And also, it provides rights to the individual. The main agenda of the democracy is to uphold the fundamental rights of the citizens. So here it provides the rights to individual, then equality of every citizen and liberty. And the state shall look into the certain notions, and state shall provide necessary conditions. Then democracy is an efficient and responsible form of government. This is also an important quote. You can also start an answer with this quote, that democracy is an efficient and responsible form of the government. It is by the people, for the people, and to the people. You can quote all such things, and it promotes welfare of the people. Yes, because democracy ఏం చేస్తుంది? It is there for the purpose of upholding the rights, right? So, in a way, it promotes the welfare of the people. And it is government by the majority. Yes, majority party which got power or which got seats shall be made to form a government. It's there as per the rules book procedure. And also tolerance. This will increase the tolerance of the people towards the political institutions. And character building. So, as people are not directly participating, but even though indirectly method, they are electing such representative, right? And also they'll understand, or they'll study the political behavior or the political structure. So that is why it will help them have, or involve this character building. Now, the demerits of the democracy. So, demerits is democracy is based on numbers. Yes, that is what the majority winning. Right, that's only right. So democracy is based on numbers, and this is a cult of incompetence. Because even if you do something or not do something, if your party gets highest number of votes, then you can be allowed to establish the government. So that is why it could be also called as cult of incompetence. Then tyranny of the majority. So the minority opinions or minority voices could be cut down, because majority. So democracy is representation of the majority. Now it's little expensive, because if you look at India's election procedures, the amount of money that goes into it, or a huge number of election expenses, will cause, and there's been many studies by Election Commission of India also, and after such studies it came up with a slab, but still the election expenses could go to greater extent than corruption, because I will give you money, you should vote for me. This in a way creates the institutional corruption. The main purpose of electing the representative will go in vain, and them voting for citizens voting for money will has created a new concept, or has legalized the concept of corruption in general sense. Then it is unsuitable for democracy, because the as the many representatives will be held, it cannot singly or uniformly pass any bill as such. Now, the safeguards in democracy. So, for a democracy, or for anything to be called as a democracy, it shall have certain safeguards. So, these safeguards are basically you can call them as a summary. Yeah. So, what it happens is, everybody shall have faith in democracy, then only the democracy shall prevail. So, the people will, if they lose interest in political institutions, then it will cause then it will if people lose faith in democracy, then it will collapse. The governments will collapse, and the power will come into certain only certain gang of people. So they will form a syndicate, and they will outrightly pressurize the minority, and the voices could be unheard, and anything could collapse, and it will establish to oligarchy or anything as such. Now, next one is universal education, because this is very much necessary, because universal education in a way impart citizens to have the basic idea or study about how policies are made, how the political structure could be addressed, or they will in a way learn the political language or the political sphere, or analyze the pros and cons in electing a representative, or in choosing a party that will come into power and form the government. Then removal of poverty. So democracy through democratic institutions will enable the policymakers and the executive and legislative to come up with certain policies which can help them enable the downtrodden people and uplift them. So in a way, it will help in removal of the poverty. And also, what is now next one is rule of law. So it's a rule of law, not the rule of certain individual that will uphold the power. Then the other one is bi-party system. If there's a single party system, you cannot make them accommodate your issues. You cannot call them out, right? So there has to be other the party which can be equally powerful but also not in power. They can call out this the government or the power from time to time. And independent media means media's main agenda is to pass information from the government to the citizens and citizens to the government. So if the media itself is corrupt and taking sides of the government or taking sides of the opposition party, then information could be rigged. So the media can lose its independence, and information which is necessary for the citizens to be passed will not be reaching them. And also strong opposition. The strong opposition is necessary because in absence of strong opposition, the government can make laws which will be sometimes be violating the sanctum of the constitution or the sanctum of the democratic institution itself. So if there is an opposition in place, they can argue for it. They can put out their point saying this is not at all necessary. This is against the people interest. This goes against the rights of the people. So they can have a healthy arguments in making the government overpowering itself. Then patriotism, it creates, see, for any democratic institutions to function as such, one must have this patriotism or nationalistic feeling towards a nation. ఇది నా దేశం, ఇది నాది, సరిగ్గా పనిచేయాలి అనే పేట్రియాటిజం అనే భావన ఉన్నప్పుడే ఇట్ కెన్ హెల్ప్ దెమ్ అండర్స్టాండ్, or it can make them feel that these representatives are accountable to us. So we have to make our nation to be intact. So this creates a feeling of oneness, and the patriotic sentiments could not be hurt. And also the various issues, the minority issues, shall be also be addressed. And decentralization of power. This is the most important concept, 74th and 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Acts, which created the devolution of power to even the grassroots levels, has created the participation, increase in participation of people right from the grassroots levels, and help them understand how important it is for them to take or participate in political policy making or voicing their opinions. So if any doubts, we can. And possible questions, what will be the possible questions? Direct democracy, what is direct democracy? Then explain its instruments. Then they'll ask you what is indirect democracy. Direct democracy explains instruments. Then merits and demerits you can go for. Then characteristics of democracy and criticisms of democracy. Then what is indirect democracy? Merits, demerits, its characteristics, and also the safeguards of the democracy. So, and also the one or two definitions of what is democracy and the meaning of democracy, definition of democracy. This is how you can approach an answer. So if there are no certain doubts, we can call this session off. I hope I'm clear in all the previous, uh, these all 5 lectures.
Yes, ma'am.
So if it's done, we can end this session. Hopefully, I expect you to follow up the PPTs, the material, and write an answer for yourself or read at least after the class, which will help you understand the concepts better. So I guess see you all in next class. Till then, yeah, take care.